Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. My name's Shumon Basar. Thanks to my guest, Sophia Al Maria, who I'll introduce in more depth in a minute. Thanks also to a number of people that have been extremely helpful in putting this together. It wouldn't have happened otherwise, so thank you to Manijay, to Natasha, to Boris, to Zainab, to Simeon, to Peter, and to Ellie over there as well. Thank you so much. If you could please turn your phones to silent right now, we would really appreciate that. You know how annoying it can get. And I think we'll get going. So there's a little introduction that's almost a ritual now of this format program that sort of sets the scene. Then I'm gonna, in a way, do a sort of extended introduction to this topic of the self format, and then I'll introduce you to Sophia, and then we'll have a conversation with her and hopefully with you as well. Okay, let's get going. So, Samuel Beckett once said about James Joyce's work in progress that form is content and content is form. A few decades later, and Marshall McLuhan declared that the medium is the massage. Inspired by these words, format is about the shapes that discourse takes. What's the grammar of how we know or feel things? And if there are hidden politics to presentation, what are they? So this is the 8th issue of Format, what I call a live magazine. 2 years ago, we thought about the couple format. What brings couples together is often also the thing that tears couples apart. And then last year, we followed this up in a way, still thinking about a very particular kind of couple, which is the power couple. And then we extended that out into think about the status of power today and whether power is more or less visible, particularly in this deepening age of data capitalism, which I'll talk about more in a minute. And then also pertinent to what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of weeks, the question of where power is moving from and where it's moving towards. So this year, I would like to focus on the unit of the self, or the self format. One definition says that the self, quote, is an individual person as the object of his or her own reflective consciousness. I think it's worth repeating that again. So the self is an individual person as the object of his or her own reflective consciousness. But in fact, it's a very slippery concept, one that's often interchanged, maybe carelessly, with the term the individual. Question, what are the historic sources of the self? Why did Adam Curtis describe the 20th century as the century of the self? For those of you who don't know this series, it's originally a BBC documentary series by Adam Curtis. I can't recommend it enough. It's really amazing, and I won't go into great depth, but it sort of talks about the migration of Freud's theories of the unconscious and psychoanalysis, and how they then migrate to America and in essence give birth to theories of advertising, marketing, and publicity. And so Curtis describes this century of the self. And in a way, maybe the argument will be the American consumerism, or North American consumerism as we know it, would not perhaps be what it is without Freud's theories of the unconscious. And then another question is, what has become the self at this point in the 20th century, as I said, where data capitalism is poised as the dominant economic, technological, and political framework for generations to come. Here on the right, the cover of The Economist last year. if the 20th century, certainly the post-war 20th century, was defined by and fossil fuel kind of capitalism, is data the kind of new resource that's going to define this century? So here are some of the questions that we're going to be looping around again and again in different ways with our different guests. Questions like, where do you begin? Where do you end? Are you crowdsourced? Do you selfie? Do you militantly not selfie? Who knows you best, your family or your data? And have you tried uploading your soul? So, as I said before, I introduced Sophia, and we kind of start the conversation there. I wanted to expand this introduction a little further and ask, what do the current advances in automation mean for the self? So I'm sure all of you, certainly most of you, will be familiar with this very contemporary screen encounter, when you have to prove that you're not a robot, simply by clicking this box and then pressing submit. Maybe you've also noticed a recurrent internet meme in the last few years, and that is of robots failing to do what they're programmed to do. For example, a police robot falls into a pond, a service robot gets sad and shuts down. Social media robot develops antisocial tendencies, starts sounding like an all-right nutcase, and has to be switched off in a feverish panic. Funny that these malfunctions may be, but there are also occasions where humans assert their superiority of intelligence, common sense, decorum, over a form of technology which threatens to make humans redundant in many ways. Now, mechanization is, of course, much, much older than a Google algorithm. Ancient farming tools extended the power of man to shape the earth and yield volumes of food otherwise unimaginable. The Chinese invented moving type over 1,000 years ago, automating the act of writing, which, till then, had been sensuously handmade. The Industrial Revolution in England during the 18th and 19th century ushered in textile factories, which gave birth to modern capitalism and modern Western class systems. Here on your left is the spinning jenny from 1748, which many consider to be, in a sense, the kind of ground zero of modern industrial mass production. So during this time and time after, men, and for a long time it was only men, synthesized with machines in a ballet of repetitive production. Leisure time, i.e. having the weekend off, is a direct consequence of this industrialized labor. And now, in the 21st century, we're told that we might be forced to endure full-time leisure time because we won't be needed for menial or maybe even sophisticated jobs. The history of automation is, amongst many things, a history of freeing ourselves into a kind of permanent holiday, which we never asked for. And we can't afford the holiday because we don't have a job. You can see how pernicious this loop potentially is. Here on the right is arguably the most famous kitchen from the 20th century, the Frankfurt kitchen from about 1927. And it was designed with maximum, almost like robotic machinic efficiency in mind. So by mapping all the different permutations of course, at that point, a housewife would have to make between washing the dishes, getting the crockery, finding the right glasses, was sort of crunched into the early equivalent of an algorithmic design of a kitchen. So there are all these ways in which man and machine have been, of course, in this as a kind of ballet. Now, in the same way, mill and factory owners became super rich by automating work life and maximizing profit. There's an imminent likelihood that digital automation will do the same. Today's privileged few, Facebook, Amazon, Tencent, Alibaba, instrumentalize the many, i.e. us. Except it doesn't feel like we're being made to be subservient or trapped. In fact, it feels like we're freer than ever. Free to post pictures of our amazing holiday in Ibiza, free to tweet at politicians that we deplore, free to order this beautiful three-piece tuxedo for our pet dog and return it if she doesn't like it, and free to dismiss facts. The old capitalism was tough capitalism. The new capitalism is seductive capitalism. The easiest way to admonish Generation Y, also known as millennials, which may be many of you in this room, is to highlight their tendency to take pictures of themselves and to post these, of course, on social media. For some time, for some, certainly those who are maybe older than you, this is a deplorable vanity that's scaled up to global exhibitionism. But what these critics don't see is the way in which the selfie is, of course, at the very core of data capitalism, which itself not only requires constant machining by algorithms and server farms, but also the permission from every person to be turned into harvested data. You're sold, you're resold, you're patterned, and then ultimately fed back to yourself. A perpetual feedback loop of selfhood mediated by automated processes set to maximize profits. And of course, the selfie is arguably nothing new. Here on the right is one of Rembrandt's very, very late last self-portraits. And in fact, he made, part of his repute is based on his kind of constant, almost obsessive documenting of himself, aging into, senescence almost. One of the most hyped features of the new Apple iPhone, which many of you may have, is its face recognition security. This idea is that instead of tapping in a code or even using your fingerprint, you simply look at the screen. If it's you, it will unlock the phone. However, not long after its launch a few months ago, a Chinese customer realized that her new phone was unlocking with any of her female Chinese friends. She took the phone back, found the same error in the new handset, even with the third. Now, importantly and interestingly, this error or this problem has not been reported by any Caucasian customers, only people of color. So if the iPhone had been trained to detect nuances in Western faces, whereas when it came to Asian faces, like the old racist adage goes, they all look the same, right? In a recent essay, which I, again, can't recommend enough, by the sci-fi writer Ted Chang, who wrote the short story that the film Arrival is based on, Ted made this very provocative claim that, quote, when Silicon Valley tries to imagine superintelligence, what it comes up with is no holds barred capitalism, end quote. Okay? So when Silicon Valley tries to imagine superintelligence, what it comes up with is no holds barred capitalism. Machine learning has often worked from inputs given to it, from which it learns patterns of differences and similarities. Now, if it's never been shown a picture of a horse, it will be hard-pressed to tell you what a horse looks like. Extending this further, our overarching technological systems, i.e. to do with loans from banks, Uber passenger ratings, immigration software at airports, are determined by the moral, ethical, and ideological values that we endow with it. For Ted Chang, this still remains, and maybe arguably always will remain, that of capitalism and everything that sustains capitalism. And he also adds that, quote, the question of how to create friendly AI is simply more fun to think about than the problem of industry regulation. Just as imagining what you do during the zombie apocalypse is more fun than thinking about how to mitigate global warming. Asimo was a robot created by Honda in the year 2000. It became one of the very first successful two-legged, self-regulating walking robots. It also evidenced a familiar aesthetic form, like a human in an astronaut outfit, somewhat slow and cumbersome, but essentially anthropomorphic. In May 27, here on the right, the Dubai police launched the world's first operational robot policeman. Not surprisingly, he is called Robocop. He has a stylized human torso, whereas the lower half, which I'm not showing here, dispenses with legs completely. Of course, he moves around on wheels. But importantly, he has a face that can recognize human emotions and emotes back, especially in troubled moments. And then at this January at the CES, which is the world's biggest consumer electronics show held in Las Vegas, Honda revealed 4 new robots here at the bottom under the banner of 3E concept. That's empower, experience, and empathy all working together. Now, the model which really drew my attention was the one here on the left called 3EA18, which they describe as an empathetic robot device designed to explore the human emotional connection, the emotional connection between machines and humans. Now, its primary function is like that of a guide dog, administering comfort in times of distress. But I wonder why the rounded egg-shaped form, like a robot ghost, and it has, importantly, a very soft rubber outer skin. So it's not hard to touch, apparently it's soft to touch. 318 is not humanoid, but closer to a Pixar character from WALL-E, which I'm sure all of you know. The shape of care, in this case by Honda, becomes simplified, without sharp edges, and importantly, non-anthropomorphic. So at this current moment, there's a sort of tussle between a sort of Terminator aesthetic, a Terminator type reference, which of course is sort of scary evil, and instead sort of this here on the left, 3A18, which is that of the cute, which now denotes the good. Dating apps have become part of today's dating culture. Algorithms match us up to someone that likes the same music or is crazy about kayaking. Apparently, there are people who are crazy about kayaking out there. Very recently, it was discovered that millions of Chinese men who thought they were conversing with real Chinese women were, in fact, merely interfacing with quite clever chatbots. Now, in the process, various companies had made hundreds of millions of dollars. Duplicitous as this may seem, one could also say that all of these chatbots had, in fact, passed the famous Turing test, which, of course, is a test of a machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. So according to that criteria, these chatbots had completely passed the Turing test, and as such had reached a sort of degree of sophistication in terms of artificial intelligence. For someone called Zheng Jiajia, who grew tired of pressure to get married from his parents, he decided to wed a robot that he had created called Ying Ying. So in China, there are 113.5 men for every woman, meaning many men will never find human wives. Could the gap be filled by androids or apps? Could a robot ever truly love you back the way that you love it? Now, this is another famous robot from the past. Here on the left, in 1996, Garry Kasparov, the then world champion, played against IBM supercomputer Deep Blue. Kasparov won. A year later, and this time, Deep Blue was the victor. It was the first time a reigning chess champion had been beaten by a computer and marked a symbolic threshold, a shift in power. In 2015, here on the right, Google's AlphaGo deep learning computer program beat a world-class human professional Go player for the first time in history. Now, those of you who know anything about Go will know that it's exponentially more complicated than chess. Like the number of possibilities of moves within Go are in the tens or hundreds of millions. So this becomes a new threshold, again, by which to measure so-called artificial intelligence. But this is all very well, you might think. Will we see machine intelligences win Nobel Prizes for literature and science, or indeed the Pritzker Prize for architecture, a Grammy for Best Song of the Year? Now, it's hard to imagine, even now, because we have characterized AI as excelling in computational tasks, which include chess and Go, but still profoundly lacking in creativity, which we can recognize as being original. So it's very interesting that one of the spaces that humans still feel they can protect from artificial intelligence is that of creativity. So again, what are the kind of inimitable ways in which we can define ourselves through what we do that can't be done by machines? But in fact, what we're seeing, particularly in the last 5 years, as artificial intelligence has moved models, particularly to that of a neural network, is that those sacrosanct, firewalled privileges that we believe belong to us are actually one by one, in a sense, being kind of crossed off the list, right? And if this keeps on going, what's left, right? Now, in my opinion, some of the best poetry of the last decade is, in fact, email spam. Its language has a quality close to human, but also jarringly wrong. As such, spam opens up a new, strange tenderness in human language. I think we need to embrace these glitches. In the same way that Copernicus shifted the Earth away from the center of the universe, we also need to shift our perception that we are at the center of culture. It's as if culture, with all its irrational drives and opaque metrics, such as beauty, for example, is the last little defensive island that humans can stay protected on. When Andy Warhol said, "I want to be a machine," could he have predicted a time when a machine might turn around to us and say, "I want to be Andy Warhol"? So, to finish off, I think it's crucial to remind ourselves, even in the face of the most apocalyptic of scenarios, made famous by The Matrix, Blade Runner, and of course Westworld, whose season 2 just finished last week, that the problem of automation isn't automation. The problem, as is often the case with everything, is us. Thanks very much. Okay, so at this point, it gives me really great pleasure to introduce my guest for this evening, Sophia Al Maria. Sophia is a Qatari-American artist and screenwriter. She's currently writer in residence at the Whitechapel Gallery here in London. Her first book, which came out a few years ago, is called The Girl Who Fell to Earth, with a callback, of course, to David Bowie, and a collection of her writing called Sad Sack, which is such a sad title for a book, will be released later this year with Bookworks. So keep your eye out for that. Sophia is often associated with the phrase Gulf futurism, which is a contested term, can mean anything from the obsession with gleaming skyscrapers to generational jumps brought about by the providence of indigenous oil and imported technology. The last time Sophia was here for format, we were remembering Kurt Cobain, who too could be said to be a kind of defining self for maybe our generation, maybe generations to come, who knows. So will you please join me in welcoming Sophia Al Maria? Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Well, it's interesting hearing your presentation there, because would you say that it's correct that you and I almost universally disagree on everything?
Everything except each other.
Yeah, that's about it. And I am a extreme techno-pessimist. Mm-hmm. And so hearing you talk about all of that tech is something that I think will be interesting to come back to shortly, because I very firmly believe that the way of the future is in fact via human evolution in terms of empathy and emotion. And mm-hmm. So Shumon asked me to prepare an opening gambit for this evening. And on my way here, I found one. And here's
lying around.
Here's one. Here's one I prepared earlier. Have any of you had a cryogenic
Cryotherapy?
Cryotherapy? Oh my! There's one in the room. This was new to me, so I at first read this and I thought it said "cry open," and I thought that it was some kind of an art project. But in fact, it's not. It's inviting you to join the cold revolution. Beauty by the cold, TM. I am curious, actually.
It's really bizarre. I did it in LA, of course.
Of course, naturally. Yeah. I was going to ask you, do you have skin tags, solar lentigo, age spots, warts?
If I had, would I tell you?
Viral verruca, dysmorphia, maybe just low self-esteem brought on by taking too many selfies at the wrong angle. Any of that?
You're getting pretty personal.
All
of the above.
So I'm just going to read you a little bit of this because I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. And there's a reason for that. I'm actually experimenting with a new kind of essay in my Whitechapel residency, which is based on Ursula Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction, which is the thought that instead of having a through line, a la the spear, the original human invention, a story is perhaps better collected in a bag. So I'm going to give you a series of pieces of information, and then you can draw the thesis for yourself, because that ain't my job in this situation. So let's hear a little bit more about CryoPen, shall we? CryoPen is an advanced cryotherapy innovation that is fast, effective, safe, and a new solution for removal of all your imperfections. Procedures typically last from 5 to 30 seconds. It emits a fine jet of nitrous oxide, which, by the way, is what my favorite band Ween used to use to make their music. And it allows the clinician to work with millimeter precision. This destroys the tissue, forming ice shards and crystals which rupture the membrane. Were you aware that this is what was happening when you had this done?
No one told me this was what was happening, no.
Thereby, it destroys the cell. This means there will be no collateral damage to healthy tissue. It is so incredibly accurate and practical. Now, I don't know about you, but that actually sounds extremely violent to me. And it's also interesting that it sort of goes in first cycle freeze, second cycle thaw, and then you go into the third cycle of freeze again. It's in this sort of weird geological time of your face, like the aging process is somehow the equivalent to ice ages. And then the thing that I find most disturbing here is the side effects being nerve damage and shards of frozen ice being stuck inside of your derma. And finally, is the treatment painful? Well, the answer is yes. And that reminded me of the constant refrain as a child, a small child, of my mother and her twin, my aunt, saying, whenever they would have to be like ripping through our hair with a comb, like, forcing us to take baths we didn't want to take, they would always say, "It hurts to be beautiful. Girls, it hurts to be beautiful." And that, I think, is completely indicative of the ways in which the sort of, I guess, ideals of human beauty are transmitted to us from a very early age, is pain. It has to be pain. So there is another kind of personal question I'd like to ask. Of everybody, really, what is the extremity that you would go to achieve your ideal body shape, face? I mean, I know what my limits are. I've already passed them. But it's also because I have a very low pain threshold and have been waxing since I was probably way too young. So that's my limit. What about you?
What would some examples be?
Fillers?
Fillers?
Do you have fillers? I'm asking you.
I don't have fillers.
That's thrilling.
Yes.
You're looking really great.
Thank you very much.
One extreme which I'm about to share with you. I'd like you all to close your eyes and imagine the most beautiful, the ideal human shape and form. How do we pull that up? I'll tell you when to open your eyes. Are they very beautiful? Okay, now open your eyes. So this lovely creature is actually, some of you may have encountered this, as it was a recent sort of experiment by an anthropologist at the University of Birmingham named Alice Roberts. And Alice had this idea that she wanted to create or figure out sort of scientifically what the ideal human form would be with all of with the most, combining the most sort of evolutionary, the best evolutionary traits of all creatures on the planet. So this is what happened. Essentially, a marsupial pouch is a great example of something you might want in the future. Giant eyes and ears, reptilian skin, and then if we go to the next slide, you'll also see the legs of an emu, large 3 toes, and then most excitingly, you may notice in the left hand, this is holding an iPhone or some kind of a smartphone. So I felt that was the creepiest thing about this.
The phone?
Yeah. I mean, I can deal with the marsupial pouch. I would gladly have a small mammal crawl up inside and stay there, even if it looks like a hideous Cabbage Patch doll. But I did think that the sort of the idea that the phone was somehow an extension of an earthling's, because this isn't the ideal human form, is it? This is the ideal earthling form. That's the important distinction that I think that Alice missed in her project. But the idea that the phone is present is really interesting. I don't know if anybody else feels that way. But
do you feel like the phone, like the phone is the one thing that hasn't evolved here, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. It's sort of, I guess it's already reached its apex, its most idealized form, but I mean, I'm very against having anything inserted into my eyeball.
Just your eyeball?
Yeah, specifically.
But wouldn't surely the next thing would be that there wouldn't be a distinction between the object and the subject?
I mean,
right?
that might be what's happened here. I mean, for all we know, it's a sort of David Cronenberg connection, like in Existence, where the sort of chords are Tetsuo Iron Man'd to her arm. But it is a very strange image that I wanted to bring here today to put in the seed bag for you to think about, because I think that this is quite an extreme extremity. I don't plan on ever having emu leg extensions. I know that there are such things as bone extensions and other things to make yourself taller, but that I think is kind of one of my limits. And also, like, this character really looks like something out of an SF sort of situation. So I'm much more in the camp of non-hard SF, non-tech SF, and that leads me to the next gambit that I brought for you all, which is, and also just about the Kylie Jenner pictures right here. This is a totally separate thing. At what point does the culture of the Kardashian household makes this okay, right? This like extreme modification of the body. All of us modify our bodies in different ways, right? Whether we're dieting or we have any kind of dysmorphia, but it's very extreme here. And so I think it's really interesting that the household politics of this particular family has managed to colonize the conversation, and everybody, all of our minds. I mean, I don't know about you. I hope that you don't pay attention to them as much as I do. I would like not to, but I can't not. So it is a sort of tyranny, right? The tyranny of the Kardashians in your head all the time, especially if you identify as a woman. It's very difficult to get away from. So there's another picture of this transformation, which I cannot understand. It's two different human beings. It's my facial recognition technology is going majorly haywire here, and I wonder if the iPhone would actually recognize the two that's Kylie, right?
Yep.
The two Kylies. See, even I can't recognize it to the point of not knowing if it's Kylie or not. So yeah, the next.
But sorry, Sophia, does this terrify you more than, the more infamous examples of celebrity plastic surgery gone wrong, like
No, I just.
Sly Stallone's mother, for example?
I mean, or Lil' Kim,
Yeah.
or any number of people, but it's just the example that I most. I guess I feel that there's something interesting in the fact that it's an entire family of people who are all being slowly morphed and molded to look more and more like each other, or rather more and more like one person in the family. And that as they age and as these their own, like, I guess, ideas of like selfhood are slowly being re-uptook into this familial unit, which is really strange. Or I don't know, I think it's interesting. I'm not the only one to be fascinated by the Kardashians and horrified at the same time. And that's not a moralistic judgment, I just am. So our next item of conversation this evening is a piece of science fiction which is extremely important to me, and I suggest everyone reads the Xenogenesis trilogy by Octavia Butler. And I love Octavia's work in part because Octavia really was dealing with the thing that science fiction should always be dealing with, which is the present and actual sort of, I guess, the concerns of a particular time. And I think her work dealing with race, gender, sexuality is extremely relevant right now for us as a sort of message from the past. And
if I just interject a little bit, I think one of the motives to get her to write was that she loved science fiction growing up, but there was no science fiction that included her or people like her. She said, she said that there were basically no black characters. All the science fiction, particularly the American science fiction that she'd been reading, was an entirely white kind of universe. And this seemed to her to be obviously like politically and morally outrageous. On the one hand, you have all the sort of expansion of possibilities that science fiction is there to bring, to provide, to imagine, and yet it was doing so in an entirely kind of whited out universe.
Absolutely.
And so Butler basically said, well, I'm going to start writing science fiction that includes people that look like and feel like me, And I thought that was like really interesting, really important in terms of that self, right? Like being able to not see yourself somewhere. And that becomes a space of opportunity, actually, for a whole.
Well, she conjured a space for many people who came after her as well. But one of the things that I think is really exciting about her work, and this in particular, was the sort of reversal of a demonization of like certain ways in which, I guess, if you want to call it like the sort of SF canon of like Asimov and white men everywhere, is, for example, her alien colonization story is actually, in a weird way, like a piece of really detailed erotic fiction. And rather than being a sort of it's an interesting take on colonization because humans have destroyed, like, we've killed ourselves with a nuclear apocalypse. And the Uloi and Uankali, who are these aliens, save a select few humans, and then 250 years in the future, wake them up. And begin, because they are DNA traders of the universe, they begin to form family units with humans. And so humans and Uloi need each other to form a greater whole, a new, essentially, race of galactic travelers. And the thing that I think is really beautiful / possibly problematic for some people, but the thing that the Uloi find most problematic about humans is they specifically mate with human females, because the need for hierarchy in a human male is something which is deemed our biggest evolutionary fault. It's the thing that has held us back from going further. And so, and also like a lack of ability to just cooperate and meld essentially with others. And so I think that this was something that I thought of in regards to the self, because a lot of the sex scenes, which I highly recommend that you read, involve sort of telepathic ecstasy that happens between humans who are attached to these tentacles. Obviously, tentacle porn is something that we've already invented ourselves without the aliens, but so it's clearly some kind of subliminal trait, some subliminal fantasy that many people have. So we're waiting for the Uloi. And then finally, this attitude around colonization, beauty, ideal versions of the human. I want to bring my final example, which is specifically the Met Gala, where we have Earth's finest humans on full peacock display. And I chose Solange's outfit in particular because I was watching it, and I don't know if any of you were paying attention, but and there's no reason you really should, because it's not a particularly important thing really in the pantheon of important things. But this year, the subject matter, or the theme of the gala, was Catholicism and the sort of glories of Catholicism. And I found that really strange, given the fact that this is in, these are all people, a lot of the celebrities are sort of aggrandizing the Catholic Church, and are also have histories of being a people oppressed essentially by Catholicism, and this is happening in the United States and the quote-unquote new world in bead-bought Manhattan. And so the fact that only Rihanna seemed to do anything that was a bit to the Catholic Church was sort of funny to me. So I wanted to make up a version of what I think my ideal extreme version of something someone might wear to this Met Gala might be. So if you don't mind, I am going to read something to you. So the thing that shocks me on this first Monday of May is that no one, not even one as supposedly woketh as a Knowles, considers in their wear the atrocity of the Catholic Church, the horrors wrought in the name of it. And how there is in the center of bead-bought Manhattan the legacy of colonialism and so slavery and genocide, and it's all being covertly celebrated. So I'm going to give you this description of my imaginary look for the Met Gala 2018, Heavenly Bodies, Fashion, and the Catholic Imagination. And this was inspired by Solange's outfit, which I think I really like. It's the pleasing pun of the do-rag, the halation, the sort of H.R. Geiger stripes and rubber, drawn back like lily lips around her stamens. She really looks like an alien from some kind of extraterrestrial diocese, and I think that's incredible. But Solange could have done this instead. First, I would flay the face back to reveal Fleischglam realness. To complete the look, I would apply Aztec gold as highlights on the cheekbones, literally. Rubies and sapphires can be mixed to draw attention to any other protuberant bits of skull, and also teeth. A custom scalp piece made from the bald pates of celibate missionaries with trimmings of armadillo leather, beaver fur, and Amazon parrot feathers would pin the full flay in place. Instead of a clutch, I suggest carrying a jar with a fetus belonging to an extinct tribe inside, and a nod to the Inquisition tactic of slicing female heretics' breasts off. I would have a seamless double mastectomy, stitches ruining the effect, and in somewhat belated solidarity, but solidarity nonetheless, with Muslim, Jewish, and pagan sisters. This would allow her to fill the sackcloth and smallpox gown out nicely with a spreading blossom of blood. Drawing attention to the waist, I would strap a bespoke chastity belt made of an antique bear trap, its jaws clamped across the lower entrances, snapping any protuberant members at the root. I don't normally do backlists, but this time I would suggest showing off the festering brand rising in the shape of a squash blossom, which is a very important symbol. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with it. I really would want the wound to be the centerpiece. And finally, I suggest opting for a rusty nail born through each foot rather than a more traditional stiletto to bring a little bit of hobble chic to the stigmata show. And it is a horror show, isn't it? So I hope that that wasn't particularly upsetting for anyone, but what is a red carpet for if not to absorb blood? And with all of that horrific violence in the form of fashion, and in the form of body modifications, and all this terrible things that we do to our bodies to make ourselves better, stronger, happier versions of ourselves, I hand it back over to you, Shu.
Thank you, Sophia. My nickname for Sophia is Debbie Downer. She's one of the most beloved, depressing people I know of.
I'm depressed.
But at the same time, I think rightfully, your pessimism is often rightfully directed. I wanted to start maybe actually by going back to one of the places where you grew up, which was in Qatar, and I was wondering whether there was a kind of defining moment. I think all of us probably have an age where we feel like we suddenly know who we think we are, which is maybe different to who we have to be because of our parents, our culture, the community, and so on and so forth. And was there a moment in Qatar when you felt like yourself had arrived? And I'm wondering whether that moment had anything to do with any form of technology.
I'm not sure that that self has ever arrived, in fact. Mm-hmm. As I'm constantly, I'm a bit of a late bloomer, so I never really feel like I'm fully here yet. And indeed, I don't know, again, if anybody else has this feeling if you've run away to join the circus or you've gone away to make your life somewhere else, and when you go back home or to the various places you might come from, you just regress back to like a state of sort of your worst version of your teenage self. That's something that I fight with every single time I return to the place. Like you sort of end up in stasis in the places where you were. So if I go back to Cairo, I'm still in my early 20s and belligerent. If I go back to Doha, then I'm sort of in a state of belligerence. But I would say that the thing that Doha changed for me personally was it freed me from the, I think, oppressive uniqueness of American, specifically like body conscious culture in a way that was specifically linked to wearing abaya, but it also meant that I was less concerned, sort of had less dysmorphia there than I would have otherwise. Now that's not to say that it doesn't exist there at all, because it does, and it's very prevalent. But that would be, I think, what I would credit Doha with doing in terms of the development of the self.
And maybe it's also, I think it's worth qualifying to those who maybe not necessarily familiar with the evolution of that part of the world, but gas is discovered about 1940. It's predominantly a sort of Bedouin
It was
culture.
discovered quite a while before the war, but they didn't
start drilling and exporting it and kind of making wealth from it. But in a sense, the trappings of modernity come relatively late. And there's a kind of jump that goes from pre-industrial to post-industrial. So people don't necessarily have landlines, but they might have a Nokia 3220.
Yeah, there's a sort of there's a time warp, some kind of, what do you call it in Star Trek? The jump that you have?
Yeah. And so I guess it seems to me that it's a very exceptional backdrop against which the arrival of these technologies, whether it's television, whether it's the phone, whether it's the car,
whether it's laser.
Whether it's laser holograms.
No.
Oh, laser,
like
hair removal.
Hair removal.
They're almost like controlled laboratory
before
condition.
laser and after laser in the Gulf.
Yeah.
There's a body hair problem that people perceive as a problem. And
suddenly,
when laser came, so also arrived a group of wayward doctors who famously began to incite horrible violence on brides-to-be. In fact, one of them was called the Butcher. I heard about him from a waxing lady. Anyway, anecdote.
What happened to the Butcher?
I think he's still practicing.
Wow.
Don't get laser in Doha.
Don't get laser in Doha. Top tip. I remember you once telling me that there was a moment where you're like, if you can measure individual freedom, your freedom jumped levels when the phone and the car came together. And particularly, I think, for young girls in these cultures, which are extremely still very patriarchal, honor-based cultures, where the smallest amount of shaming can have the most drastic effect, not just on an individual but a whole family. I just remember you telling me once that suddenly the car meant that you could get around, and then the phone meant that you could suddenly have
get
around, quote marks. True?
Yeah, I think, well, the phone was, I was 16 when it was a huge controversy. The first sort of gray Nokias were just coming in. We were transitioning away from bleepers to these phones, and I was the first one in the family to get one, and it was very shameful. And it was only because I was on my own without my parental units, and I was in the extended family unit, and my father said, oh, well, I need to be able to get in touch with her in case of an emergency. And so that's the only reason, but it wasn't for, I would say, that's 2000. It wasn't for many years until it was more prevalent because, among other things, and that was before the camera, right, on the phone, which has been the absolute bane of anyone who wants to sneak around, because that has led to a lot of problems in terms of, some very serious situations, as you can imagine, in an honor-based culture. So, the phone was definitely revolutionary for me, but again, it was a bit of a fluke in the larger culture.
Then I want to pick up, I'll open it up to you guys in a minute, but I want to pick up on a word that you used right at the beginning, which was empathy, and in relation to human evolution. And I mean, I was earlier describing this almost this like kind of list, whole sacrosanct list of qualities humans believe are inimitable to them, which make us what we are and make a machine not what we are.
Yeah.
Is empathy on that list for you?
Yes. And the other thing is shame.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those two really cancel each other out in a lot of ways.
How?
Well, if you think about, again, like something like, if you feel total and utter empathy and you can identify completely through whatever means with another person's experience, they will know that you understand, and therefore they don't feel shame, and you won't, do you understand what I'm saying? So I think that is the sort of the way in which I would like to see a future unfold, is one that there isn't any body shaming, no slut shaming, no any kind of sort of shaming coming from external participants in your consensual reality. And that would allow for a greater collective self to emerge, whatever the hell it is, with us human Zs.
Human Zs. Are there any questions or comments from anyone out there for Sophia?
Any questions for Shumon?
Oh yeah. Could you?
I was wondering if there's no shaming and judgment like you're talking about with body, and if beauty is entirely not historical, would there still be adorations of self, of our physical self? So, did you say adorations? Adorations like plastic surgery. Or do we still want to change like how we look like? I guess the ideal would be no, that we would allow entropy to take its course, and revere and love the elder versions of ourselves as much as we do, and as much as we idealize ourselves at 17 or whatever the year might have been that we feel that we were at our peak. If that makes sense. It wasn't 17 for me, I can tell you that. I'm hoping it'll be 85.
What do you think?
I was wondering if that relates to like gender and sexuality, and how you definitely obviously think about that, but yeah. No, so that's definitely a really key consideration in this, because obviously, for example, also othering the body is things like drugs or hormones, which I've undergone various kinds of hormone therapy myself, and I feel my personal feeling is very complicated. But in terms of someone who feels some kind of very painful dysmorphia or dysphoria or any sort of discomfort with their body, that's a very different thing, I think. But I wonder if the empathy was so deep that just living inside of one's body wasn't a trap, that maybe there would be some kind of answer without having to physically alter ourselves. But I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know if that's even how I feel. I'm just being honest.
Anyone else? Yep, please. If you could speak up so the recording gets you.
While describing the Kardashian body morphing...
Okay, you just use the mic, thank you.
Sure. While you're describing the Kardashian body morphing phenomenon, you mentioned, or you said that, I hope this isn't part of the pantheon of important things to you, which got me thinking, first of all, what are the pantheon of important things to you both, and is that related to your sense of self? And so does that mean that the media that we consume, is that reflective of who we are? Is there a relation there at all?
Well, you are what you eat, and I eat a lot of Kardashian material. That sounds really cannibalistic, I'm sorry. But I think that when I said that, it maybe sounded a bit flippant. It's not like I don't want to like make a moral judgment on what is and isn't important in any particular person's intake, but I think there are more edifying things for myself to be paying attention to. But that takes a lot of, fuel and energy to be able to access and really understand fuel and energy that I don't have right now.
I mean, for me, it's a vigilance. So it's being vigilant to everything that's happening, and especially the things that that are designed for us to not notice that are happening, right? So, and there are forces always at play. Those forces have agendas, and we're usually the target of those forces and of the outcomes of those forces. And I think and we'll probably touch on this at some point during the next couple of weeks, but if you read an essay by Trevor Paglen called Invisible Images, which I really recommend, it's in the New Inquiry, it came out last year. And so, Trevor is charting the sort of, again, the evolution of what we think of as an image from being that which was maybe once created exclusively by humans for the edification of other humans. Maybe some dogs and cats enjoyed it in between, who knows, but generally it was kind of human-to-human transmission. But now, Trevor would say there are more images that have probably been produced today than there have been in the history of images. But the vast majority of those images are made by machines, for machines, right? So they're images that they're non-retinal images. They exist as packets of data. We literally can't access. There's no way in which you can access them, right? So this is one regime at which you could say the post-human has already arrived, and another is like the way in which 90% of the world's financial stock market trading is, as you know, algorithmic as well, right? So it's machines trading with other machines. Humans almost have no, So again, if these are tendencies, and we keep, they're going to keep moving forward. They're going to, what's that is it an asymptote? Is it a terminus point? But again, I think we have to be vigilant that these things are happening, and that there are effects on us. And I mentioned this thing, which I mean, it's not my invention, but someone sort of coined this term of seductive capitalism as opposed to tough capitalism. So tough capitalism is kind of punitive, or it's like making you can't do this, you can't do that. And seductive capitalism is like you can do everything you want, But the underlying agenda is still the same, right? Like wealth, even more pernicious wealth disparity, disenfranchisement of the many, et cetera, et cetera. It's basically the same. It's just that the guise under which it happens is, it becomes something else. And so for me, it's about vigilance, and being able, and also importantly, when it comes to AI, because I've been thinking about this a lot, that too much is at stake to leave the future to the technologists, right? Even though their rhetoric would be, we're going to make this is an amazing world, right? We're going to get rid of this. We're going to, you just have this. You'll never have to leave your house because everything will come to you, et cetera, et cetera.
But first, we'll burn the whole planet out by continuing to use fossil fuels. Absolutely. Like maniacs.
Yeah. So, I think if you go back to like the 50s. there's this kind of notion of the culture wars, or the culture war between, let's say, art and science, or the humanities and sciences, And science for centuries, certainly Enlightenment on in the Western part of the world, but going way back to like the Islamic era, Islamic kind of golden eras of Baghdad and so on and so forth. Science was a kind of way in which culture manifested and iterated and expressed itself. I think something's happened in the last sort of 20 years where I think technology has replaced science. Now, you could say technology is a branch of science, but I think technology has become a kind of an ontology and epistemology, and therefore also a politics. But I think it's still, our ability to kind of recognize it is still very nascent compared to, let's say, the history of science, where it's been around for 1,000 years. So again, I think it's just simply teaching ourselves the vigilance to know what's going on, and to not leave these decisions that are affecting all of us down at the microscopic level to them, right? So, anyone else? Yep, over here. Could we get the mic here, please? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think a lot of the discussion today has been about the self in the singular, but a lot of the time the self is produced in a plural way, with production of self on the internet through social media or even avatars in games. So what do you think, just wondering what your thoughts were on having many identities in the digital landscape, on the idea of self, like your understanding of yourself?
Sure. Sophia? Do you feel liberated by being able to be dominatrix kitten 598 in Second Life, or overrated?
I think I need to think more about this, because I'm also very dubious about others pretending to be dominatrix, kitten, et cetera, because it's a realm, it passes into the realm of fantasy, which is something that I love dearly, or that I live inside of as much as I can. But I think it goes back to that question we were talking about before, like with empathy, or like the sort of hyper-empathy, that it might be something that could like almost, I'm not sure how productive I feel that it is to be able to hide behind a mask, because that allows, for example, your worst version of yourself to come out, in addition to the best version of yourself, which you can design and build. And so I'm not so certain about that. That's why, again, I think that to step away from technology and focus on actual human interaction as much as possible, and building something like between us, new ways of living together, new ways of building communities, new ways of doing these things without technology is what I'm more interested in, because the technology is entirely based on a system which is doomed, in my humble opinion, as a techno-pessimist and also as a person who is upset about the fossil fuel-based economy. And so that's, I guess, why I think that, in my humble opinion, which is extremely humble, I am dubious about the projection of multiple selves. Although, has anyone here seen Sense8? Yes. My favorite show. But that, again, sort of is the sort of thing that I think I in the fantastical realms, that I would like to see a version of the self being, for example, a cluster of 8 people across the planet who all share, who are a variety of cultures, genders, points in their lives, and they form a one. And I think that's pretty amazing.
I mean, I would just add that I agree with Sophia that what should be a kind of emancipatory potential, right, has now become the opposite, it seems to me, right? So, like, you could be very nice to me in person and genuinely mean it, but then you would write the most atrocious comments on something that I'd written online.
How do you know I've been doing that when I am actually dominatrix?
I thought it was her all the time.
It's both of us.
It's both of you.
We're all the same person.
So that somehow the lack of accountability is almost like, the removal of, the Freudian superego, right? So you just get like pure pure concentrated id, and that is horrifying, right? I mean, it's horrifying, I think, for anyone used to or still valuing, something like social decorum and respect for others and like shared common space and things like it. It's horrifying, and that seems to be where a lot of which I mean, it says very depressing things about us, right? Like we've just been waiting for a moment to arrive where we can ditch our superego and have no accountability for ourselves. This is what we've been waiting for, for thousands of years of human history. It's pretty, it's quite dark, right? So over here, microphone, please. We'll take a couple more and then we'll wrap it up because it is quite hot.
So you talk about the greatest version of you said super
intelligence.
Yeah, being what as you described.
No hold barred capitalism. That's what Chang said. Yeah.
And your version of this ideal self is this ultra empathetic entity. We seem to get so excited about consumption and like changing our faces and all of this. What's something to get excited about that is taking us down this path of vulnerability that will lead to empathy? And are there certain movements or people that are leading this?
Sophia, do you know? Are these things happening in your knowledge? These emerging forms of being together, or?
I would say that's very much a question I'm trying to figure out right now. So I don't feel very adequately placed to answer that. I really am having some kind of a weird flashback, like probably people were having these conversations, like hippies were having these conversations, and their generation, the boomer generation, which we've discussed at length before, I feel dropped the baton and left us in the lurch. And so picking that baton up again, I'm not sure where it lies. Psychedelics, meditation, holding hands in a drum circle. I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out myself without sort of going down a sort of spiral that loses all grip on actual reality.
Yeah, like when Burning Man and its original intentions, and now you have people with private chefs and $3,000 tents,
Yeah, it turns into another consumerist exercise of sort of wealth display. Yeah, I know that I'm really excited by a lot of people who are activists, who are especially like artists who work inside of certain situations and collectives, and I think that is what I think and I hope is the thing to be excited about. I don't know.
Okay, we're gonna have to wrap it up here. I am sorry it's so hot.
Yeah.
We will work on that certainly for Friday and onwards. Not that we can do much about the weather, but hopefully we can at least get some fans in here. And we'll also work on the seating. Thank you for the patience of those of you who's endured standing up at the back or on slightly awkward benches and so on and so forth. It's a really amazing turnout for the first event. I hope to see as many of you as possible on Friday, where we have Douglas Coupland, who's here in the front, and Hans-Ulrich Obrist. And we will no doubt be touching on many of the things that we've touched on today. And in particular, we're thinking about this notion, which is sort of neologism that we have of the extreme self and what or who that might be today. So thanks so much for coming. Please join me in thanking Sophia Al Maria, and see you on Friday.
Thank you.